The wagon wheel caught a rut 3 miles outside Millhaven, and Mara the orc singer rode the lurch with a hand on the sideboards and her eyes on the road ahead. She had ridden worse. She had ridden every road between the Ashwood Hills and the coast of the Greyville Sea, and she had learned long ago to brace herself, not just for rutted roads, but for the sound that would meet her the moment she stepped into the light of a new town stage. The laughter, sometimes it came before she even opened her mouth. Millhaven was a frontier market town, the kind that grew up fast around a river crossing and never quite finished growing. There was a tannery and a grain mill and a row of timber-framed shops, and at the center of the main street stood the Alderman's Hall, which doubled, on the 5 nights a week when the Penhall Traveling Theater was in residence, as a performance house. It had a raised wooden stage, a curtain the color of old claret, and 3 rows of benches that could seat 100 if they squeezed. The Penhall Company had arrived that afternoon, 6 wagons, 12 performers, and Edric Hollowell, who drove the last wagon and served as the company's stage carpenter, set builder, rope rigger, and whatever else needed doing that nobody else wanted to do. Edric was 58 years old and had been with the Penhall Company for 11 years. He was a quiet man. He had a craftsman's hands scarred across the knuckles, sure in their movements, and a habit of noticing things that other people didn't. He noticed, for instance, that the second curtain rope on the left side of the stage had frayed at the pulley and would need replacing before the evening's show. He was up on the rigging platform working on it when the rest of the company began their warm-up below, and so he had a good view of the rehearsal floor when Mara came in from the side door with her prop chest under one arm. He had seen her, of course, in the months since she had joined the company. She was hard to miss, not because she was loud or demanding, but because she was the only orc in Millhaven that evening, and perhaps in this part of the territory, and she moved through the world with the careful, held-in quality of someone who had learned a long time ago that taking up too much space was dangerous. She was tall and broadly built, with deep green skin that had gone a little darker at the temples with the years, and her hair was braided back with carved bone clasps, the silver showing more than black these days. She had a scar along her jaw that she never explained, and when she was alone she had a habit of touching it lightly with 2 fingers, as if reminding herself it was still there. She set the prop chest down at the side of the stage and knelt to open it. The latch stuck. She tried it once, twice, 3 times, and then sat back on her heels and looked at it the way a person looks at a thing that has been giving them trouble for a long time. The latch was iron and the chest was old. It had belonged to the company long before Mara joined, and the hinge had been failing for weeks. Edric noticed. He climbed down from the rigging platform with his tool roll under his arm, crossed the stage without being asked, and crouched down beside the chest. "May I?" he said. She looked at him, one of those measuring looks, quick and thorough, and then moved aside. He studied the hinge for a moment, drew out a small iron file, and went to work. It took him perhaps 2 minutes to reset the pin and smooth the binding edge. He clicked the latch open and closed twice to test it. "It'll hold," he said. "If it gives you trouble again, bring it by the wagon and I'll put a proper new hinge on it." She said, "Thank you," not effusive, not stiff, just a quiet word given to a person who had done something worth thanking. He nodded and went back to the curtain rope. That was how it began. The evening performance opened with the Penhall Company's usual fare, a comic sketch, a juggler, a recitation, and Millhaven filled its 3 rows and part of the standing space behind, the way frontier towns always did when entertainment came through. People who had been working since before dawn, tired and pleased to have somewhere to sit in the warm. They were not unkind people, most of them. They were just people who did not know an orc performer from a traveling curiosity, and when Ranwick Penhall, the company's owner, a broad man with a showman's voice, announced that the evening's final performance would be a song by the company's own Mara the singer, the sound that went around the room was not quite laughter yet. It was that preparatory shuffling that comes just before, the shared quick glance, the half-smile that says, "This should be interesting." Mara walked out onto the stage in a plain dark dress and her bone-clasped braids, and she stood in the pool of lamplight with her hands at her sides, and the laughter came. Not loud, not cruel in the way that cruelty shouts, just the low, self-congratulating sound of a room that has decided the joke is already told. A few people in the back were already putting on their coats. She began to sing. The room did not go quiet immediately. It took a few bars, maybe 10 seconds, maybe 15, but it went quiet. The sound that came out of Mara was not what any of them had expected. It was not a curiosity or a spectacle. It was a voice that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the chest, lower than low, with a resonance that made the old beams of the alderman's hall vibrate in sympathy. It was the kind of voice that made a person stop what they were doing and wonder what they had almost missed. For a few minutes, the room almost forgot its own joke. Then the song ended, and the awkward shuffle returned, and the applause was scattered and confused, the sound of people who had been moved by something they did not expect and were embarrassed about it. One woman in the second row applauded properly, and then looked around at her neighbors and stopped. The man beside her hadn't started. In the wings, Edric had finished with the curtain rope and was coiling the old frayed piece for the scrap basket. He did not make a noise. He was not the sort of man who made noise about things. But when the applause came out thin and embarrassed and wrong, he set the rope coil down, stepped to the edge of the wing curtain and clapped. Not frantically, just steadily, the way a man claps when he means it. Mara, standing in the lamplight with the last note still warm in the air around her, turned just slightly toward the wings. He was not sure she could see him. He kept clapping anyway. She took her bow, she walked off. He went back to the rope. Later, after the house had cleared and the company was bedding down in the wagons, or in the 2 rooms Penhall had rented above the Millhaven guest house, Edric set a mug of tea outside the small storage room off the backstage that Mara used for her dressing space. He had made enough for 2, poured his own, and then thought about it for a moment, whether it would be welcome or strange, and decided that a person who had just sung beautifully to a half-empty room that laughed at her entrance probably deserved a cup of tea, and left it at that. He set it on the step, knocked once, and went to check on the rigging. The tea was gone in the morning. She did not mention it. He did not expect her to. The Penhall company was booked in Millhaven for 5 nights, which was the usual run, and on the second morning, Edric was rebuilding a section of the stage riser that had gone soft, probably a leak from the roof that nobody had fixed in years, and Mara came and sat on the edge of the stage above where he was working. She had a piece of bread in her hand, the heel of a loaf, and she was eating it in small, careful pieces. She watched him work for a while. He worked the way he always did, methodical, quiet, without fuss. "You were in the wings last night," she said. "I was working on the curtain rope." "After," she said. He looked up at her. There was something careful in her expression, the same measuring quality as when he had crouched down beside the prop chest, but softer now. "The applause needed help," he said. She considered that for a moment. Then she took another small piece of bread and did not say anything else for a while. He went back to the riser. "I've been performing for 30 years, she said eventually. He glanced up. "Every town is different," she said. "Mostly not, but every town thinks it is." He thought about that. Does it get easier? She looked out at the empty benches, 3 rows of wood in a half-dark hall that smelled of lantern oil and sawdust. "You learn to read the room before the room reads you," she said. "That gets easier. The rest stays the same." He nodded. He understood that in the way a craftsman understands the grain of wood. You don't fight it, you work with it, and you know it will always be there. "Where did you learn to sing?" he asked, not prying, just asking the way you ask when you want to know. The question seemed to land differently than she expected. She looked at him, not wary, but surprised, as if she had been waiting for a different kind of question, the kind that starts with why or whether. "From my grandmother," she said. "She was the first singer I ever heard, in our clan long hall at the winter feasts. She had a voice like a river at night." She paused. "She said voices ran in families. She told me mine would come in low, late, and last. She was right." "She sounds like someone worth knowing," Edric said. "She was," Mara said, and she ate the last piece of her bread, brushed the crumbs off her hands, and stood. "Your riser is soft on the left side too," she said, "about 3 planks down from the center." He tapped it with his knuckle. She was right. 30 years of stages, she said, and went back to her room. He fixed the left side too, and thought about what she had said about her grandmother, and about voices that come in late and last. The third night's performance was worse than the first. Word had gotten around Millhaven, the way word always does in a small town, and the audience came with their minds already made up, and the man in the front row center brought a friend and made sure the friend was seated in time to watch the entrance. The laughter when Mara walked out was louder this time. 3 people left during her song. The others stayed, and some of them listened, and a few of them were quieter at the end than they had been at the start, but the applause was worse. Someone in the back called out something that Edric did not hear clearly and did not want to repeat. He was in the wings again, and he stepped out the moment she came off. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked at him. Her expression was controlled in the way that a person's expression is controlled when they have had 30 years of practice at it. "It's a crowd," she said. "It's a bad crowd," he said. "That's different." She looked at him for another moment, and then something in her face shifted, not much, not dramatically, just a small softening around the eyes. "Yes," she said, "it is." He said, "You were remarkable, the same as every night. That part was not different." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're a strange man, Edric Hollowell." "I know," he said. She went to her room. He left the tea on the step again. And in the morning he was at work repairing the stage trapdoor hinge, which had needed doing for months and which he was finally getting around to, when she appeared with 2 mugs this time, set one next to his tools, and sat down cross-legged on the stage above him without a word. He picked up the mug. It was good tea. Stronger than he usually made it. "My grandmother called it perseverance tea," Mara said. "She made it the same way every morning, strong enough to be worth drinking, bitter enough to remind you the day is real." Edric tried it. "She was right on both counts," he said. Mara almost smiled at that. He noticed the almost as carefully as he noticed everything else. They sat in a companionable quiet for a while, the easy kind, the kind between 2 people who have each spent a lot of time in their own company and know how to leave space in a conversation for thought. Edric worked. Mara watched, or looked at the empty hall, or closed her eyes the way a person does when they are listening to something only they can hear. "What do you do," she said after a while, "when the wood won't cooperate?" He considered the question seriously. "I step back and look at it from a different angle," he said. "Usually the problem is that I've been working against the grain. You have to find the direction the wood wants to go and work with it instead of against it. It takes longer. It holds better." She said. He looked up. She was looking at the back wall of the hall, the empty space where the audience would be. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Whether to change the order of the songs," she said. "Put the Holdwater ballad first. It's slower, harder to laugh at when it's quiet." She paused. "Whether that's working with the grain or letting the grain win." "The grain doesn't win," he said. "You just learn to read it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My grandmother would have liked you." It was simply said, without ceremony, and he received it the same way, a thing given, a thing received, both of them looking in different directions. On the 4th evening, Ranwick Penhall came to find Edric in the workshop behind the hall. Penhall was not a bad man, but he was a practical one. the kind of practical that looked at everything through the lens of what the crowd would and would not pay to see. He had run the traveling company for 23 years, and he had a showman's instinct for the room, which meant he had a showman's instinct for cutting whatever was not working. "We have a problem," he said. Edric set down his plane. "She's good," Penhall said, with the tone of a man who is about to follow that statement with a but. "She's more than good. I know what I'm hearing when she sings. But the Millhaven crowd isn't hearing it, Edric. They're not going to hear it. And I've got a booking in Whitford after this, and Whitford is a bigger market, and I can't open the Whitford run with a performer who can't get a crowd." Edric was quiet for a moment. "She's getting a crowd," he said. "The crowd is just being foolish." "The crowd is the crowd," Penhall said. "She's the best singer you've had in this company in the 11 years I've been with it," Edric said. He kept his voice level. He was not a man who raised it. "If you cut her because Millhaven was too slow to listen, you'll regret it until the end of your days." Penhall looked at him for a moment. "This isn't like you, Hollowell." "No," Edric agreed. "I'm not cutting her," Penhall said after a pause. "I'm asking you to, I don't know, talk to her, see if she has something that'll land better in Whitford." He rubbed his face. "I want her to work. You understand, I want it to work. I wouldn't have booked her if I didn't. I just need the crowd to come around." Edric thought about what Mara had said about reading the room before the room read you. "Let me talk to her," he said. He found her behind the hall, sitting on a fence rail in the last of the afternoon light, mending a tear in the hem of her performance dress with needle and thread. She did fine work. The stitches were small and even, the kind of mending that would be invisible when she stood in the lamplight. She did not look up when he came around the corner, but she was not startled either. She had heard his footsteps. "He wants to cut the act," she said. It was not a question. "He wants to keep you," Edric said. "He said it badly, but that's what he wants." She set down her mending and looked at him. The late light fell across her face and the scar along her jaw and the carved clasps in her braids, and she looked, in that light, like something old and patient. The way a mountain looks old and patient when you stand close enough to read the texture of its stone. "I've been cut before," she said. "I'll be cut again." "You won't be cut from this company," Edric said. "Not while I'm in it." She looked at him steadily. Something crossed her face that he could not quite name. "He doesn't own me, Edric," she said. "He doesn't," Edric agreed. "But he can make your life easier or harder, and I'd rather it was easier." She picked up the mending again and made 2 more stitches in the hem. Then she said, "I changed the order of the songs the way we discussed. The Holdwater ballad first. I think it will be different." "I think so too," he said. She said, "I don't need saving." "I know," he said. "But I noticed," she said, without looking up from the mending, "that you stood up for me. I wanted you to know I noticed." He said nothing. She finished her mending. The light went down in the west, and the smell of the cookfares came in from the town, and they sat in a comfortable quiet on the fence rail until it was time to go in and set up the stage. The 4th night was different. She opened with the Holdwater ballad, a slow, ancient piece in the low register, something that asked the audience for patience before it asked them for anything else. It had no flashy entrance. It had no announcement. She simply walked to the center of the stage and stood in the lamplight and began. And the room, which had been braced for the joke, didn't quite have time to make it. The song came in under the noise and settled there, like a hand laid on a shoulder, firm and warm. By the 2nd verse, the room was still. Not the stunned stillness of the first night, the embarrassed quiet that people pulled back from as soon as the song ended. Something different. The stillness of people who had sat down expecting one thing and found something else entirely. Something that reminded them of something, a grandmother's kitchen, a fire on a winter night, the particular quality of silence just after something beautiful has ended, and before anyone has decided how to feel about it. She sang 4 songs. At the end of the 4th, the applause came without the shuffle and the confusion. It was not a standing ovation. It was Millhaven, and Millhaven was a frontier market town, and it did not do standing ovations on a Tuesday. But it was real applause, the kind that fills a room instead of just touching its edges, and it lasted longer than it had any of the previous nights. Edric in the wings clapped. She found him after the house cleared. He was working on a broken bench in the third row. Someone had sat too hard on the end slat. She sat on the bench beside the broken one and watched him work. "That was different," he said. "Yes," she said. "The Holdwater Ballad," he said. "I haven't heard it like that. It sounded ancient." "It is ancient," she said. "It's older than this territory. It was old when my grandmother's grandmother was young." She paused. "It was the first song she taught me. She said to save it for the rooms that needed it most." He looked up at her. "She was wise," he said. "She was," Mara said. "I spent 30 years arguing with her advice, and about 20 of those years discovering she was right." He almost laughed at that. It was not quite a laugh, it was a quieter thing, a breath and a small movement at the corner of his mouth. But she caught it and matched it, and they sat in the smell of sawdust and lantern oil for a while, both of them a little lighter. "Tell me about her," he said. "Your grandmother." It was not a small question. He asked it like a man who has time and is willing to use it. Mara was quiet for a moment, not the cautious quiet of someone deciding whether to trust, but the thoughtful quiet of someone deciding where to begin. "Her name was Vara," she said. "She was the keeper of the songs for our clan, what the clan calls the song thread, the whole living memory of the people kept in music. Each keeper holds the thread and teaches it forward. She held it for 47 years. She paused. "She was the greatest keeper our clan had in living memory. Her voice was lower than mine, even impossibly low. You felt it before you heard it." She touched the carved bone clasp at the end of one braid lightly, the same gesture she sometimes made near her scar. "She told me I was born to hold the thread after her. I argued with that too, for years." "Why?" "Because it meant staying," she said. "In one place, in the clan long hall, the keeper doesn't wander." She looked at the empty benches. "And I needed to wander. I needed to know what was out past the valley, past the Ashwood Hills, past the places she'd been. I needed to see if the voice worked somewhere other than where it was born." He set down the hammer. "And does it?" She was quiet for a moment. "It works everywhere," she said quietly. "That's what I learned. My grandmother knew it. She let me go because she knew I needed to learn it for myself. She said, 'Mara, the thread doesn't break when you stretch it, it just reaches farther.'" Her jaw moved. "She died 6 years ago. I wasn't there. I was in a town called Dresswick, singing to a room that laughed." The words came out matter-of-factly, the way an old grief comes out when it has been held for a long time and learned to find its shape. He heard the weight of it. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's all right," she said, and then after a pause, "It's not all right, but it's carried." He nodded. He understood that too, the particular heaviness of a grief that you have learned to carry not because it got lighter, but because you got stronger, and the difference between those two things. "I had a wife," he said, 7 years ago, Marin. She died in winter of fever fast. We had 18 years together." He looked at the bench slat in his hands. "I took the job with Penhall 3 months after. I thought the moving would help." "Did it?" "It helped with the stillness," he said. "The stillness was the worst part, coming home to a house that was quiet in the wrong way." He fit the slat back. "The road is never quiet in the wrong way." She looked at him, a longer look than usual, not measuring now, just looking. "No," she agreed, "it's never quiet in the wrong way." They sat with that for a while, two people who had learned to carry things, in a half-dark hall that smelled of sawdust and old curtain velvet, and the silence between them was the good kind of silence. The kind that says, "I have been here before too, and I understand." It was Mara who broke it, eventually, and only to ask about the wood. She had noticed, over the past few days, that he always had a piece of it somewhere near him, in the workshop, in the wagon, sometimes just a small offcut in his coat pocket that he would take out and turn over in his hands when he was thinking. She asked him about it now. "It's a habit," he said. "My father was a joiner, furniture, mostly chairs and tables and the good kind of things that people use every day. He said if you want to understand a wood, you hold it. You feel the weight and the grain. You learn it before you ask anything of it." He turned the piece over in his hands. "I've kept the habit. I don't always make anything with them, but I know what I'm holding." "What's that one?" she asked. "Ashwood," he said. "From the load we picked up outside Millhaven. Good straight grain, dense, best for something that needs to last." He held it out. She took it, turned it over in her own hands. She had a craftsman's touch, he noticed, careful and deliberate. "Where did you come from, originally?" "The Ashwood Valley," she said, "north of the hills. That's where our clan is settled, the Ashwood clan." She looked at the piece of wood in her hand and then at him. "I grew up with the smell of it." She handed it back. He put it in his pocket. "I'll think of that," he said, "every time I work with it." She looked at him with the small softening at the corners of her eyes that was. He had come to understand how she smiled when she was most at ease. The fifth and final night of the Millhaven run came in cool and bright, with a frost on the ground by sundown. The Penhall Company had their usual bustle of last-night preparation, checking props, freshening costumes, the juggler running through his routine in the yard, Penhall himself in full showman mode, louder and more expansive than usual. Mara dressed in the small backstage room as she always did, alone, and when she came out she found Edric at the curtain rope, checking the replaced piece. He always checked his repairs before the final night. He glanced up when she appeared. She was wearing the performance dress with the mendied hem, and her braids were done up differently tonight, the clasps higher, the arrangement more formal. It was not a grand transformation, nothing theatrical about it. She simply looked, more than usual, like herself. "Last night," she said. "For Millhaven," he said. "Whitford next week." She nodded, then, "Will you sit in the front row tonight?" He had not sat there before. He had always watched from the wings where the work was. He looked at her. "The front row is for the audience," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm asking you to be in it." He thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved, which was not long. "All right," he said. He sat in the center of the front row for the full evening's performance, through the comic sketch and the juggler and the recitation. And when Ranwick Penhall announced the final performer of the Millhaven run, he sat straight in his seat and waited. The laugh came as it always came, but it seemed thinner to him tonight, as if Millhaven's capacity for the joke had been slightly worn down by 4 nights of hearing the actual thing. It did not disappear, but it was thinner. Mara walked to the center of the stage, stood in the lamplight, and began with the Holdwater ballad. The room went quiet faster now. She sang all 4 of her songs, and when the 4th ended, the applause was the best it had been, fuller than the night before, fuller than any night. Edric applauded, seated in the center of the front row. When she took her bow, she looked directly at him, just for a moment, not performing the look, not staging it, just a person looking at a person they are glad to see, and then she looked back at the room. After the house cleared, they walked out into the cold night together and stood in the yard, looking up at the stars, which were bright and numerous and indifferent to the town of Millhaven, and the small matters of its opinion. "That was the best of the 5 nights, he said. "Yes," she said. "Whitford will be better," he said. She looked at him with something in her expression he had not seen before, a particular kind of weight, as if she were measuring something against something else, and not quite certain of the scales. "Edric," she said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "There's something I haven't told you." He waited. "Not a secret exactly," she said. "More like something I don't tell people in every town, because every town is different and most of them aren't worth the telling." He waited. "There are people looking for me," she said. "I don't mean trouble. I mean, my clan has been sending people to find me. Elders, they've been following the tour. She paused. I've been avoiding them. He looked at her. Why? He asked. She was quiet again. The frost sat on the fence rails and the wagon boards. The horses breathed warm cloud into the cold air. Because when they find me, there will be a choice to make, she said, and I'm not sure I'm ready to make it. He did not push, he never pushed. When you are ready, he said, I'll be here. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, your grandmother would have liked you too. He almost smiled, properly this time, the full version, not just the breath in the corner of the mouth. She saw it, and something in her answered it, and they stood in the cold yard looking at the stars until the frost drove them inside. The company reached Whitford 8 days later, after a stretch of road through the Greenville country that was beautiful in a hard-edged way, bare oak and frost fields, and the smell of the river below the bluff. Whitford was larger than Millhaven, a proper trade town with a purpose-built hall that could seat 200, and Penhall was in high spirits, and the juggler had learned a new trick, and Edric had fixed the trapdoor hinge properly and replaced 2 more curtain ropes, and was feeling, in the quiet way he sometimes felt things, that the road ahead was longer and more interesting than the road behind. On the second morning in Whitford, before the first performance, a rider came to the hall's side door asking for Mara. Edric was inside, checking the rigging, and he heard the exchange without meaning to, the rider's voice, then Mara's, then silence. He did not go out. He worked on the rigging, and when she came back inside a few minutes later, her face was the most still he had ever seen it. They've found me, she said. He set down the rope. Are you all right? He asked. Yes, she said. I knew they would. I always knew they would. She touched the clasp on her braid. They're coming here, a delegation, 7 elders from 7 clans. She looked at him. Not just my clan, 7. He looked back at her steadily. He did not know everything that meant, but he could read the weight of it. 7 clans, 7 elders. These were not small numbers. How long do you have? He asked. They'll arrive by tomorrow evening, she said. After the first performance. She paused. I wanted you to know before anyone else. I'm glad you told me, he said. She stood there for a moment. This woman who had been carrying the weight of 30 years and an unanswered letter from her grandmother's keepers, and he watched her carry it with the same patient steadiness she always had, and he thought that, whatever the 7 elders wanted, she was going to hear it standing up, the same way she stood in the lamplight every night. However it comes out, he said, I'll be in the front row. She looked at him. The something in her expression from the cold yard in Millhaven was there again, fuller now. I know, she said, that matters. More than you might expect. The first Whitford performance went brilliantly. The hall held its 200, and Whitford had clearly heard more music in its time than Millhaven. There was something in the way the audience settled when she walked out that was already different. No laughter. A murmur of uncertainty. Yes, the same cautious shuffling, but not laughter. And when she opened her mouth and the Holdwater ballad came out, the room locked into quiet in about 4 seconds, and it stayed quiet through all 4 songs. And the applause at the end was the best she had had from any human crowd in years, full and genuine, and, in the front rows at least, enthusiastic. Edric, in the center of the front row, applauded until his hands were warm. They arrived the next evening in a procession that was, by any ordinary Whitford standard, extraordinary. 7 orc elders, each accompanied by a junior attendant, each wearing the clan colors, deep-dyed wools and leathers, and on the eldest of them, a heavy pendant of carved green stone that looked older than the town itself. They came on horseback, 14 riders in 2 columns, and they drew every eye on the main street of Whitford as they passed. Children stopped and stared. The inn's stable boy forgot what he was doing entirely. Even Ranwick Penhall, who was hard to impress, went still when he saw them coming around the corner toward the hall. They asked for Mara. She met them in the hall's entrance. This was her choice, not theirs. She stood in the doorway, dressed in her plain clothes, her braids in their bone clasps, the scar on her jaw catching the lamplight. She did not make herself small. She never made herself small, but tonight she was particularly and deliberately upright, and Edric, who had stationed himself on the rigging platform above as he always did before a performance, looked down at the top of her head and thought that this was how she had always stood, just that the room had usually been too busy laughing to notice. The eldest elder, a woman of perhaps 70, with white braids and the carved stone pendant, stepped forward and spoke in the orc tongue for a long moment. Edric did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was the tone of something important being said to someone important. Mara answered. Her voice in the orc tongue was different than her voice in the common speech, deeper and more formal, with a cadence that reminded him of the Holdwater ballad, the same ancient weight to it. When she was done, the eldest elder placed both hands together and bent slowly from the waist. The 6 others followed. Ranwick Penhall, who had been lurking at the far end of the hall pretending to check the curtain, came to Edric's side. "What's happening?" he said quietly. "I don't know exactly," Edric said, "but I think we've been considerably underestimating our performer." He was more right than he knew. The story that emerged over the next 2 days, told partly by Mara, partly by the eldest elder through a young attendant who spoke the common speech, was this. Vara, the song-thread keeper of the Ashwood clan, had died 6 years earlier, as Mara had said. But Vara had not died without preparing for it. In the months before her death, she had sent word to the other 6 clan elders. The keepers of the 6 neighboring clans owned song-threads, and she had told them that her granddaughter was the greatest voice her people had produced in 4 generations. Not in the Ashwood clan, among all 7 clans. The voice of 7 clans was a title that had not been given in 93 years. It was not a ceremonial honor. It was a living role, the keeper who held the combined song thread, who traveled between the clans, who performed at the great gatherings, whose voice was the living archive of everything the 7 clans were and had been. The last holder of the title had been Vara's own teacher. Vara had named Mara as the next holder of the title 17 years ago. She had told the other 6 keepers. She had not told Mara, because Mara had needed to wander, and Vara, who was wise, had understood that a person who is told their path before they are ready will run from it, and a person who finds their path themselves will walk it with their whole heart. For 11 years, the 7 clans had been waiting for Mara to come home. Mara sat with all of this in the hall's small back room for a long time, while Edric fixed the bench that had been wobbling in the 2nd row and gave her the space she needed to sit with it. He heard the quality of the silence from the other side of the wall, the kind of silence that follows a thing too large to respond to immediately. After a while he knocked. "Come in," she said. He came in and sat down across from her on the spare stool. He did not say anything immediately. He had brought 2 mugs of tea, the Perseverance kind, strong and honest, and he set hers within reach and held his own. She wrapped her hands around the mug and stared at it for a moment. 17 years, she said. She named me 17 years ago. She had been talking to the other keepers for 17 years. She never once told me. She knew you, Edric said. She knew what you needed to do first. Mara shook her head, but it was not disagreement. It was the movement of someone who has just understood something that was too large to understand all at once and is beginning to let it come through in pieces. She always said the thread reaches as far as it needs to. She said it the day I left. I thought she was just, she stopped. She pressed her fingers against her jaw, the old gesture. She meant this. She meant 7 clans, she knew. Yes, Edric said. She was impossible, Mara said, and the word came out with such a fullness of grief and love and exasperation that it was almost a laugh. She was impossible and she was right about everything, and I spent 20 years arguing with her and she waited. She looked up at him. She just waited. Edric was quiet for a moment. The best teachers do that, he said. They set you on the path and then they let you walk it at your own pace. They know you'll get there. He paused. She never doubted you would get there, Mara. That's the whole of it. She never doubted. Mara sat with that. The mug steamed gently in her hands. She looked like herself, which was to say she looked extraordinary, this woman who had been in 17 towns like Millhaven, and had sung beautifully in all of them, and had been laughed at in most of them, and had kept going because the voice kept going, and the voice had kept going because it was the thread, and the thread did not break. The voice of 7 clans, he said. Yes, she said. You knew something like this was coming, he said. I knew the shape of it, she said. I didn't know it was 7. I thought it was just the Ashwood clan calling me home. She paused. 7, that's different. That's not going home. That's becoming something I don't know how to be yet. He was quiet for a moment. You already know how to be it, he said. You've been being it for 30 years, in every hall from here to the Greyville Sea. You've been carrying the thread. You've just been carrying it on the road. She looked at him for a long time. Edric, she said. Yes. What do you want, she said, from any of this, from whatever this is? He thought about it with the same honest care with which he thought about everything. I want you to have what you're owed, he said. After 30 years, I want the 7 clans to hear you, and I want the 7 elders to bow again, the way the eldest one did. I want the Millhavens of the world to know what they almost missed. He paused. And I want, if it's possible, if it would be all right, to hear you sing at least once more before you go. She said, What if I don't want to go? He looked at her. The voice of 7 clans, she said slowly, is a role that travels by design. The keeper travels between the clans. There is no one place to be. She touched the clasp in her braid. My grandmother traveled. The one before her traveled. The road is part of it, Edric. I don't have to stop moving. He was careful. He was always careful. What are you saying? He asked. I'm saying that the Penhall Company goes to 7 more towns this year, she said, and the company has a stage carpenter who needs a front row seat in each of them. She looked at him steadily. I'm saying that I have been performing for 30 years to empty rooms, and I have finally found one that wasn't empty. One person in the front row who clapped when no one else did. She paused. That's not a small thing, Edric. That's not nothing. You know that. He was quiet for a moment. I know that, he said. What happened the following morning was not something that Whitford was likely to forget for a while, and Millhaven, when the news traveled back there through the ordinary channels of merchants and riders and gossip, was not likely to forget it either. The 7 elders assembled in the hall before the day's performance, and they asked Mara to sing, not for the audience, not yet, just for them. A ceremony that the eldest elder explained, through her attendant, was the hearing of the thread, the formal recognition that the voice was what it was claimed to be, that the thread was unbroken and undiminished. Edric sat in the front row. Mara stood at the center of the stage in the lamplight, the same way she always did. The 7 elders stood in the space below the stage, not seated, standing, the way the Orc clan stood when something was being given its proper weight. Their attendants stood behind them. Ranwick Penhall, who had figured out by now what was happening, stood at the back of the hall with an expression on his face that would have been described, in later tellings, as a man who has suddenly understood something that makes everything else make sense. Mara sang the Holdwater Ballad. She sang it the way she had sung it in Whitford and the way she had sung it on the 4th night in Millhaven, with all the ancient weight of it, all the accumulated grain of 30 years pressing through. But this time there was no scattered room to will into stillness. There was only the hall, and the 7 elders, and Edric in the front row, and the voice that went out into all of that and filled it completely. The eldest elder, when it was done, did not applaud. She stood very still for a long moment. Then she said something in the orc tongue that the attendant, after a pause, translated as, "The thread is whole. It is more than whole. It is the fullest it has been in 100 years." Then the 7 elders bowed, not briefly, not formally, but deeply and long, the bow of people who are in the presence of something they have been waiting for. Edric clapped, steady and genuine the way he always clapped. The evening's public performance was, in the words of the Whitford town recorder, who kept a note of notable events, unprecedented. Word had spread with extraordinary efficiency through Whitford's population that the orc singer at the Penhall Company was, in fact, the voice of 7 clans, an honor that meant nothing specific to most of the Whitford residents, but carried the unmistakable weight of something genuinely rare. The 200 seats of the hall were filled an hour early. People stood in the back. A few of them had come in from the road after the midday news had reached them, farmers and travelers, and a miller from the next valley over, who said afterward that he had not intended to stop in Whitford at all that day, but something had moved him to, and he did not regret it. The 7 elders sat in the second and third rows. Edric sat in the front row, center. Myra walked out and the room was already quiet. She had not even opened her mouth, and Whitford was already leaning forward. She opened with the Holdwater Ballad, because that was how she always opened now, and because some things are right because they are right. And then she sang 3 more, 2 in the common tongue and 1 in the orc tongue, long and deep and older than anything the hall had ever heard. And when the 4th song ended and she stood in the lamplight, the hall did something that Whitford Hall had, in fact, never done in its 40-year history. It rose. All of it. The 200 and however many were standing in the back, the miller from the next valley, the farmers and the travelers and the merchants and the off-duty tannery workers, the 7 elders who had already stood once and stood again now. They rose, and the applause was the kind that does not feel like a performance, the kind that a room does when it has no choice because the alternative is not doing justice to what just happened. Edric stood in the front row and he clapped, and he thought that his wife Marin would have loved this, would have loved all of it, this hall and this voice, and this entirely unexpected thing that the road had brought him to, and the thought was not a sad one. It was a grateful one. Mara took her bow and looked at the room, and then, deliberately, unhurriedly, she looked at Edric. The news went back to Millhaven, as news does. It traveled the way important things travel in frontier country, on horseback and in gossip, and in the mouths of merchants who had been in Whitford for the market. It went back with an edge to it, the way news with a moral always does, and the people of Millhaven who had laughed on the first night received it in various states of embarrassment and recalibration. A few of them did not recalibrate and maintained that they had had their reasons. Most of them, if they were honest, sat with the information for a few days and felt something uncomfortable settle in them. The particular discomfort of having been shown, plainly, that they had missed something worth having. The man who had called out from the back row on the 3rd night recalibrated faster than most. He told his wife, who told her sister, who told a number of other people, that he had always thought there was something to it. His wife did not correct him. Some recalibrations are their own reward. The Penhall Company moved on from Whitford to the next town, and the one after that, and the company's reputation, which had been solid and respectable before, became something considerably warmer and more interesting. The voice of 7 clans was with them. The word traveled ahead and the halls were fuller, and the front rows leaned forward before the first note, and Mara sang, every night, the way she had always sung, with the whole of the voice and the whole of the thread and all of the weight of what her grandmother had told her about patience and grain, and the thread that does not break when you stretch it. It only reaches farther. Edric was in the front row. The elders traveled with the company for 2 months, not all 7 but rotating pairs, 1 clan at a time, each taking a turn at the front of the great work their clans had waited 11 years for. They spoke with Mara at length in the evenings after the performances, and the arrangements for the voice's role were made with care and with a great deal of patience and mutual trust. She would travel. She would attend the great clan gatherings. She would teach in time the next holder of the thread, though that was many years away yet. She would carry the thread forward. She would also, with the full understanding and approval of the 7 elders, continue with the Penhall Company for the remainder of its current circuit. The eldest elder had been told by Mara, directly, that there was a stage carpenter in the company's front row who had shown her more respect in 5 nights in a frontier market town than most people had managed in 30 years, and that she intended to keep his front row seat warm. The eldest elder had listened to this with an expression of serene unsurprise. She had said, in the common speech which she spoke better than she usually let on, "Your grandmother told me about you, Mara. She said the voice runs in your family. She also said the heart does." She had paused. She was right about everything. On the last night of the season circuit, in a town called Harrow's Point, after the final performance, the best of the year, a full house, a standing crowd, the voice of 7 clans in full voice on a stage that barely deserved her. Edric and Mara sat outside the hall in the last warm night of the season, in a pair of chairs that Edric had carried out because the step was too low and the ground was too cold, and they looked at the stars, which were the same stars that had been above the cold yard in Millhaven 8 months earlier, and were no less bright for the time that had passed. The night was mild for the season, the warm kind of autumn evening that feels like a gift from the road, a reward for having gotten through the summer's work and the miles between towns and all the Millhavens in between. A fire had been lit in the hall's yard for the company's last night's supper, and the smell of wood smoke and bread reached them in their chairs, and somewhere behind them Penhall was telling an overly long story that made the juggler laugh. Mara had her mug of tea. Edric had his, the perseverance kind which had become over the season simply the kind they made. "The Ashwood gathering is in the spring," she said. "First thaw, it's the largest of the 7, the eldest clan's long haul. The other 6 come." She turned the mug in her hands. "I'll go up a week early to learn the opening ceremonies. The eldest elder wants me to sing the Holdwater ballad at the opening of the gathering." She paused. "She says our clan has not opened with it in 40 years, since my grandmother's time." "That's right," he said. She looked at him sideways. "You don't know any of the traditions." "No," he said, "but it sounds right. It sounds like something your grandmother would want." She was quiet for a moment. "It is," she said, "exactly that." She looked back at the stars. "The circuit starts again after the thaw. Penhall has already booked 7 towns for the spring run." "I know," he said. "I helped him with the wagon inspection. 3 of the wagons need new axle fittings before spring." "Of course you already know about the axles," she said. "It's my job to know about the axles." "Edric," she said. "Yes." "If someone offered you a different job," she said carefully, "something settled, something with a fixed address and a proper workshop, would you take it?" He thought about it honestly. "No," he said, "I tried settled. For 11 years before the company I was as settled as a person can be, a good house, a proper workshop, the same view of the same hills every morning. And it was fine, and then it was not fine, and then the road was what I needed." He turned the mug in his hands. "The road is what I still need, not the running, just the moving. The next town, the next hall, the next thing to fix." He paused. "And the front row." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, in a voice that was very level and very soft, "Good." "Next season," she said. "Next season," he said. It was not a question. It was not a promise exactly. It was the kind of thing that 2 people say when they have found, on the road, the particular thing that the road is most worth traveling for, not a destination, but a direction, and they say it simply, without ceremony, because the simple things are the ones that hold. "Edric," she said. "Yes." "Thank you," she said, "for the front row, for the tea, For the bench slat and the hinge and the curtain rope and all the rest of it. She paused, for not being Millhaven. He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for the perseverance tea," he said. "She was right, it's worth drinking." Mara laughed, a real laugh, low and warm. The voice that had filled 200 halls finding its ease at last in the cool night air of Harrow's Point, between two chairs that a stage carpenter had carried out, so they could both sit comfortably and look at the stars. The thread was whole, it was more than whole. And the lonely man in the front row was no longer lonely, and the long road ahead was full of halls and full of stars, and neither of them was in any hurry to reach the end of it.